Yeah, I think that, of course, you can name social movements, which are sort of the most obvious change makers, but there are many others. And I believe that in my experience, there are always individuals in different spheres, in the political spheres also, in the economical spheres, and everywhere, which are change maker. And I think it would be worthwhile to bring them together from different perspectives and only say, you know, you have the civil society here, and you have the political sphere here, and you have the economical sphere here, and the science here. So I think there's a big value in bringing them together. Last week we had a thinking space about the future of work with totally different disciplines, and I think it should be even more diverse in the sense of having also non-scientific people in this sort of thinking space. And for that, I think that science has also a very important role if it wants to be relevant for transformation, because it can be the driver insofar as not only as I said, in finding ways of orientation and giving an overview and saying what questions are important and which things to address, but also to convene this kind of thinking spaces. Because I think we are living in a world where one of the groups alone will never have solutions. So we have to find a way of bringing these kind of things together, and the science can play a big role in a sort of having the overview and finding the big question, then convening and inviting people from totally different spheres.
So I'm hearing new social movements, which are characteristic, are slightly different from the more traditional social movements. You mentioned the indignados, for example, and alliances, new form of alliances among different social actors and social levels. So let's stick with that for a little bit and think about the new social movements and what they bring to the picture, right? They reproduce and repeat some forms, but also experiment new forms. Thinking of the indignados, which is interesting, is that they are not only antagonistically fighting against something, but what happened in Madrid or in Barcelona, in Plaza Catalunya, was that they were really actually experimenting alternative ways of life on the ground, and considering also alternative ways of framing and shaping the economy, which I think is a key point. So is this what we're talking about when we talk about what social movement can bring to the table in terms of the transformation, or what else can they then bring to the table?
Absolutely, and they can bring, I mean, in collaboration with scientific understanding, as Patrizia was saying, they can really reveal for the first time to lots of people what the choices really are. I mean, we can't go on mining coal, so what are the choices, right? And they can, in that way, introduce a much greater realism into the debate.
What happens when alliances are impossible due to apparent conflicts? I'm thinking of a very specific case, which is probably also very important here for the region, about the climate camp movement, which is really very antagonistically acting to move beyond coal. And they have been organizing their camps in Rhineland, and also, if I'm not wrong, in the Lausitz recently. So this is one line of narrative that clashes against the expectations, the frustration, the fears of the local population. Are there ways to create alliances there between this type of between certain types of social movements, certain different ways of dealing with the issue of moving beyond CO2, beyond coal? I'm thinking of the transition style movement, for example, which is less antagonistic, but embodying something like that. And how can these alliances be framed while considering and taking seriously the concerns of the people who are involved? Maybe you can say something about that, Patrizia.
Well, I think that's a good example to show that perhaps in the public discourse often I think people talk about, conflicts of goals, for example, the goal of having good jobs and the goal of, fighting climate change in that case, right? But if you go deeper, the real question is the future of work. That's why we had this thinking space. because we believe that this is the real question. So the question is not coal or not, jobs or not. The question is how to shape the future of a region and to re-empower people so that, because it's also a question of identity and their own self-esteem. It's not only a question of jobs, but of course with the job you have also more self-esteem and an identity. So the question would be how to shape, this region in the next 20 or 30 years. And of course, this would also mean what kind of economy, could be established, and questions which are very concrete. And you have to, you start not from their weaknesses, I believe, but from their strengths, because there are lots of initiatives already there. The people are not passive. They're not very much connected sometimes. There's always one actor is missing at the table, but to start from what there is and having a good mapping, and then help them to self-organize their own future and self-organize their own solutions, of course, with the help of and the mandate from a state which also gives them economical support. But the important thing is not pouring some money over them, but building and shaping the future.
There are questions of identity here. I mean, in this Lausitz area, a lot of the people feel that mining is, for their way of life, right? Mm-hmm. Mining calls their way of life. But everybody's identity is complex, every human being. There are lots of different facets. So the creative thing would be to discover other aspects of identity, other important traditions in the region which one could build on to have an alternative which has a future, which mining doesn't.
If I may again jump in, I wanted to respond. I would sort of follow up to Patrizia's comment about the rationality and the emotion, which I think is a really interesting issue. The concern I have is that without understanding the emotional basis and what I think of as these narratives of identity and of worldview, which are in many ways not rational in some formal sense, but which are attached to community, to individual actions, to professions, whatever it is, it's difficult to understand how to get past that to some kind of a rational discussion. So I just wondered if you could sort of say a little more about how we could get there, other than, if you will, kind of brute force saying, well, you have to be rational, though I'm not sure I know what that is.
I wouldn't want to juxtapose, emotion and rationality in that manner you just mentioned. I can just talk from my experience, and I know that there are ways of having conversation where the self in all its, facets, it's not erased, and if you can take everything into the conversation, and this is the way I would like to go about. And precisely because I think, as I said before, the prerequisite of the democratic state is what is underlying, and social capital and solidarity are certainly not only rational concepts. So you need all that, and also questions of identity, not only questions of citizenship, but also questions of political bonding to, to a constitution or to political norms. So you should not exclude them when having exchanges about, for example, the future, because otherwise I think there's no grounding of any forms of solutions, of course. But perhaps you want to add on that?
I think
rationality, right?
Yeah, but I mean, issues of I think there's a wrong definition of rationality going around, that anything that can't be proved is not worth talking about. But I can't prove that my identity as a Quebecois, which is very important to me, ought to be important. It's not the kind of thing that can be shown. But there are things that arise about the future of this society. Is it going to have a future if it does, as a French-speaking society in North America, if it doesn't take in immigrants, and with all the consequences? Now, there's a question where people are sometimes hiding it from themselves, and there is an answer. There's an answer. But, I mean, not everything involved in this choice can be shown to be right or wrong. It's kind of absurd. We start from these identities, and understanding them is a big part of the,